What I'm about to say may shock you. Thorin is wrong. I'm wrong. Many times in my life I've been wrong. I will be wrong many times in the future. I may be wrong about the next thing I say. I may be wrong about the thing I said 2 times ago. Maybe wrong about my next video. Maybe wrong in the last video. In general, by what most people mean by wrong, I acknowledge that I may be wrong, and I've been wrong many times, and I will be wrong many times in the future. Personally, I don't find that to be a very helpful or productive way to think in terms of labeling something wrong. I prefer to say things like inaccurate, because inaccurate implies like a degree of accuracy, and at the moment we're taking the gauge that you were just a bit off in some way, or you were off a lot, and that it's possible to hone in more, and it's possible to change your perspective and the way you look at something and add in more information, and gradually something can become more active. It's not just this static wrong or right, like you're either right or wrong. Likewise, I prefer ill-informed. Therefore, we're not judging the person in the same way unless they've had the chance to be informed, they've chosen willfully not to, and they've been ignorant. We're saying they don't have all the information yet, or they don't have the key piece of information that might connect something or change the way they construct an argument or a conclusion they come to, or make their analysis or modeling of something more accurate. Likewise, I like to say I haven't developed my perspective enough in it. I don't know enough about that topic yet. Don't have enough information in general. Maybe I don't have enough of the pieces and enough of the dots to connect together so that the limited pattern I can make isn't enough because I don't have this whole other section over here. Another one is, how about has a different opinion? Not only that, has a different opinion now to what I have then. So my opinions on a number of topics now, which seem right to me, which seem accurate to me, which seem informed to me, which seem like a perspective that's well informed, seems like I have enough information. Maybe in the future I'll find out I don't. It isn't, and it's not yet. And I will find out that I was wrong, where now I'm trying to become more right. And from the new perspective, what I was now might seem right to me now, but from the future perspective will seem wrong. Now, the other reason why I don't like the term wrong in that particular sense is that in that kind of wording, wrong implies right. Like there is some sort of right. You can be right. You have the right perspective. You are right, as though it was some set thing. And yet a lot of the time, these are nearly, in fact, 99% of the time when people say I'm wrong or you're wrong, they're talking about opinions, things that actually are entirely subjective or very open to interpretation, or no one has all the information, or there's no set answer, or there's no way to empirically prove anyone is right or wrong. Likewise, false implies true. So what you said is false, therefore there is something that can be said that is true. First of all, even if the idea can be true, even if conceptually something can be true, even if there is something rock solid that is data, that is real, that is hard, that is true, that doesn't mean that when we talk about it in some way that can be true, or that something said about something is true if it's connected to something that has some universal truth to it, if that can indeed exist. Likewise, when you say someone's lying, that someone lies, that implies that there's honesty about that topic that they're not employing. Often it means that you're suggesting they do know or they can sense what the right answer is, but because they're lying, they're purposely obscuring that. They know that they're not in the right area, but they're pretending they are. I mean, I think that's pretty condescending and implies a level of omniscience on the observer. I actually assume that most people who say an opinion, as long as they seem earnest and they're not haven't got a tone as though they're a trickster or they're trying to fuck with you, I tend to assume they actually think what they think, that what they're trying to say is what they actually think in their mind, and that if they say something, whether I don't agree with it, whether I think it's actually factually inaccurate, I don't consider it a lie in that respect. I really think they are trying to be honest with that. It might be a stupid opinion, might be ill-informed, might be inaccurate, might be quite ignorant, might be idiotic in its own ways, but I don't say that they're lying in that sense, and that somehow I'm not lying if I say, I think we're both actually trying to tell the truth, and we're both trying to be honest, just we've come to different conclusions, and maybe we've used information in a totally different way, maybe more ethically involved or more intellectually involved or more reasonably, more rationally, but I still think we're both trying to do the same thing. I don't think truth and lying and right and wrong and true and false come into it to the same degree. Also, I don't think any of these states are static things, so to call something right or wrong again implies that like what they are in this state now and how we look at them and our perspective and the information we have in the perspectives are somehow not going to change. That if we found what was right and true now, it would always be right and true forever and on. That's a very naive idea. That's the sort of idea that was only really prevalent among the top philosophers and intellectual thinkers in probably like the Middle Ages, the medieval times, that sort of era. Like we're talking like 1000 to 1500 sort of, that sort of it. That's when people, especially people of a Christian bent, they thought that this was the case, mainly because they were basing it on the idea that the God has universal truth and omniscience. Therefore, basing on his words, that can be the bedrock of truth and what's good and right in the world, and humans can somehow aspire to that. Beyond that, there's also the fact that Thorin is wrong. It depends what it's about, doesn't it? Is he wrong about this thing here? Is he wrong about this aspect of that thing here? It's unlikely he's wrong about everything. It's unlikely he's ever going to be right about everything. It's possible he's wrong on some things, right on some things. Maybe he's right on very few things. Maybe he's wrong on most things. Maybe he's right on many things. Maybe he's wrong on a few things. Could be many ways. What I like to do to outline my position is definitely I don't think I'm right on everything. In fact, I am almost certain at all times, because of my experiences in life, that I've never had all the information on a topic, and I will never have. On most topics, there is so much information that even when you think you've got 99% of it, you think, right, I've almost got it all, trying to get that last 1% might take as much effort and might end up being as time consuming and mind expanding as getting the other 99%. And then once you've got half of that 1%, getting the next half 1%, and it's like you never get there. You just keep getting more and more information, and as you go deeper and deeper, you get more and more connections, and you can make more out of the other information you've gotten, and you go deeper and deeper and deeper, and you probably never get all the information on opinion-based topics, not on mathematically, empirically proven scientific facts or mathematical equations or something like that. That's not an area we're dealing in. That's not an area I deal in, certainly. It's also the case that I'm entirely aware and constantly struggling to keep myself remembering that I haven't considered every perspective yet, or every angle on a topic. There is future information I may, as long as I continue to try, discover that might change my perception of past information I had, or the patterns that I'd drawn before, or how I connected one piece of information to another. What if a piece of information comes along that slots in the middle and shows me a transition phase, or loops it back around to something else before that I hadn't considered, that seemed like it was an outlier, but now I've got something close to it, and I can draw a curve through it and a line through it. I can say, now I can bring that into the rest of the data set and see how it fits. Because of that, I'm always keeping that in my mind. So anything I think now has to be open to potentially be changed one day if the right information comes along. I also actually don't think it's even possible to be, on most topics of interest, right at all times, or right in an enduring manner, or have all the information. I also don't think you can have all the information and understand every angle. Like, as in, I don't think it's possible to possess all the information. I don't think the mind could hold it all. I don't think we could remember it all. I think we could make use of it all before we forget about it and have to rediscover stuff. I don't think we can understand every angle and see every perspective and understand everyone's, like, be sympathetic to every position. To me, in general, it's less about being right and wrong. It's very much about being informed and not being arrogant of the notion that you're right or wrong, or someone else is wrong, but rather it's about trying to be interesting. It's about trying to get your perspective that you've built up through experience and thinking and modeling, and trying to make it interesting. Trying to do something with it that's unique, or try to express it as, well, here's the key thing, here's the secret, is if you express it as articulately as possible, with your identity and the person you are and all of your experiences, many of which will be unique to you, especially in the way they've been collected together, and the succession, the series, the order of when they happened to you, and the impact they had, that if you do that, it will be unique in that sense anyway, because only you could really express it that way because of the reality tunnel you've come through. So if you do so, it will be unique. You don't have to twist it and make it unique by like picking some hipster view or something. That's one of the problems with the hipster type view. They might have a very interesting opinion, but because they identify themselves as, I'm not part of that mainstream crowd or something like that, they've actually, first of all, automatically set their position to a degree, and they're sort of forced to maintain a position in relation to that. So then when the mainstream comes to an end, they have to be like, I'm not into that anymore, I used to be, and keep moving. Whereas the opposite is, I might be into something now that's very niche. If it becomes mainstream tomorrow, I'll still like it. I might be into something tomorrow that's mainstream, might be loving it, and then it becomes weird and niche, and I want to go, that's only for people who are like weird. If I still like it, I still like it. So I'm aware that I will be wrong on many things. Firstly, due to lack of information, might not have enough, might not yet have considered or constructed or discovered a good model for how to track that information, how to see the dynamics behind how it works, how they all connect together. I'm entirely open to the notion, by the way, that many perspectives, many models can exist all at the same time, which are neither wrong or right, neither entirely accurate or entirely inaccurate, and may all just show a different aspect of something that might have their own merit and value. Like, crucially, something can be quite inaccurate, could in many senses be wrong, but have some grain of truth to it or something interesting about it, which then says something more about that aspect that you didn't get from considering a more accurate model overall, because of what that model excluded or refused to imply or didn't consider as an outlier, therefore to get more close to a safe pattern or something like that. There's also the fact that there are always going to be other interpretations from other people who are different, who have a different background, different experiences, come with a different skill set even. In general, what I'm interested in when it comes to opinions and compiling theories is modeling. And what's key about modeling is, by creating a model, and we're talking about a mental model here, an intellectual model, but it refers to what you do with an actual model. One of the things about creating an actual model like that is, because it's smaller or it's not entirely all of the same thing and it's meant to refer to something, you have to remove elements of it. You tend to remove the elements that are less important. If it's of a tree, you won't put all the background in. If it's of a tree and a car park, you won't put the fence around it necessarily. You won't put the cars that are going up the road upside. Whatever aspects you remove is because you're trying to get into some essence of it. But in doing so, and to see all that and to focus on that, you have to remove other elements of it. So in making the model, we must always acknowledge that the model is not what we are making and that we are removing aspects. Therefore, the model might even tell us something more or refer to something more or make it easier to see something. But in doing so, we will lose out on something that another model might have included, or the other model might exclude something we're looking at here in order to focus on something else. So that's the point of modeling. We want to represent something and then work with that limited set of data so that our little monkey brain, ape brain, can figure out what's going on and start to get closer to something, or figure out, by reducing the pieces, by moving pieces off the chessboard, since we've only got a couple left, the smaller interactions that are easier to see between one and two pieces and how that affects the whole game, rather than having all the pieces on the board and having to learn from nothing and having no basis and having to go in blind. So, in light of that, many models can exist. And it's not the case that one's right or wrong, and once you find one that's right, everyone else is wrong, and if they don't follow yours, you're ignorant, and all the rest of it. And also, no model is perfect, because it can't be by its very inherent intrinsic nature, because it excludes information, it excludes aspects of what you're modeling. Therefore, it can never be perfect. It can never be even as good as the thing it's representing. It's not meant to be, otherwise it would be that thing. Now, some of my thinking on this topic came about by reading the work of Robert Anton Wilson, the psychedelic journalist slash author slash scientific author slash fringe topics author from the 60s and 70s. And particularly because he was into a lot of different topics and he would often reference his sources, I then read some books by a man called Alfred Korzybski, and he had some very interesting ideas about language and how we model our reality and what these sorts of like subjective concepts that are very interesting. And so basically the basic position that I found most interesting on these topics, especially to make yourself able as a vehicle to move through all these difficult areas and navigate them without getting stuck in potholes and cul-de-sacs of I'm right and this is the way it is, it's never going to be different, to be able to keep moving and to keep changing things and to keep adjusting the lenses and to turning a light on here and to turning it off there and just listening to some sound here and asking other people who seem to have totally different perspectives to try and get into their mind. The reason why you do all these things, one of the ways you do it is something called model agnosticism. And what you're trying to do is you don't believe in anything. Nothing is right and nothing is wrong entirely, outside of mathematics and the hard sciences. And what instead we're trying to do, assign percentages. So based on the information we have right now, this seems pretty sure. This is like a 95% certainty so far. But because we're leaving the 5%, if information comes along that's interesting and seems to suggest something, well, I know there's 5% missing still, or 5% inaccuracy maybe, so I'll consider that, and then I can have a chance to update my model. I'm not locked into one worldview. Likewise, it means that even models that, there only seems 10% on this, I can still consider it without then saying I have to adopt it in any way. Like I said, these things aren't static anyway, so we're going to have to keep them moving as they go and develop them as they go. And what was right today will be wrong tomorrow anyway, as we gain more information, more perspective, and create new models and update models. There's also the fact that people tend to confuse, in my particular case, the persona that I've made on talk shows and on analysis desks, where I take my own persona, and what I do is I spice it up, I hype it up a little bit, I exaggerate it a little bit for comedic effect often, and to make the shows more fun, because I haven't got 7 hours to have a very slow discussion with someone, hear every point that they've made, go backwards and forwards on very small points till we get to a long drawn out thing, and then come back the next day and ask them more questions. in order to get to interesting points sometimes, or in order to accelerate the discussion when it's not in a very interesting place, I often exaggerate my aspects, so I might seem like I'm certain about something, so I'm right about something, because by presenting something so bluntly like that, assuming it's the right sort of person, you notice I don't do it with everyone, with the right sort of person who's likes an abrasive nature or reacts in a certain way, that will then cause them to ramp up their aspects and try and state their case more strongly, or boil it down to the simple things, or attack a certain area that they will then defend, or they will then explain why they think that way, or maybe you'll even find out they don't have an explanation right now for it. So a lot of the exaggeration of that is for effect, for entertainment value, and then also to accelerate the conversation, so it's not just a boring, drawn-out thing. But most of the time, I don't really think most of those things are certain. There's very few things in esports, particularly an opinion-based thing that's based a lot about in almost every esport, CS:GO, League of Legends, there's a massive information, and you can never have watched all the games, and you can never have interviewed everyone, and you can never have found out every behind-the-scenes detail of what was going on in that player's head before he lost this, and if something happened to him in practice, and what he was thinking. You can never know all of that. And so to make these aspects, it's only when it's a time constraint that I become certain on something, for the sake of the show. Because one thing I really hate when it's in those scenarios is when people try to be very reasonable in those scenarios and behave as you would in real life, where they say, I'm not sure about that, and even though I think this team will win, of course the other team, they could win, there could be an upset this way, and I guess if the players came and the other ones were like kind of off a bit mentally, then they could go, like, the problem with that is people tend to get into that area, and because it takes too much time, they can't make a good point because they're spending all their time putting all these disclaimers in, and so it becomes this very wishy-washy bullshit, and eventually just becomes a safety net for people not to ever truly make a statement that's interesting or has any kind of like power behind it. And because they don't do that, what happens is at the end, in many cases, they can just go, well, I did say there could be the upset, and all that. And so to me, you haven't really gotten anywhere. You haven't learned anything from the match. You just imply that, like, because you were trying to be as fair and true, you got somewhere because you were already there. To me, what I prefer to do in all these scenarios is when I make the statement, because I'm actually not committed to it, but I'm doing it for effect. After the fact, if I find out I was wrong, inaccurate, ill-informed, didn't have all the information yet, I've learned something, I've found a new model, then I like to then use the next scenario to explain why I was wrong. Oh, see, I thought it was going to go this way, as I said, but I discovered this in the meantime. And in doing so, I discover something, I communicate what I've learned, other people maybe learn something, they see that you can update your models, etc. As opposed to leave room for yourself to be right in every scenario like other people do, and then just be left nowhere still, in the middle of nowhere where you never really went anywhere in the first place. You never hinted at anything. Now, it's certainly not that I won't change my mind, but despite suggesting I'm open to all these things and whatnot, I don't change my mind without good reason. I don't just go willy-nilly. Like if someone just tells me something, if Faker tells me something about himself, and I have a whole theory built up about why I think it's this way, just because he says it, I won't just go, well, because he said that, that definitely must be true, and it must be what he thinks, and because he thinks it, that must actually connect to reality in a tangible way, and that must be why he actually does that, and that must be how it interacts in this way. I'll certainly give it a lot of weight, and I'll certainly consider it, because he's a primary source, but I'll give it a percentage again, and I'll consider it, and I'll put it into my model, and see where it fits with all the other information, and essentially what I'm saying is, I won't change my mind without good reason. I won't surrender rationality to popular opinion because everyone thinks something. I won't surrender my rationality and my opinion to authority. So when Faker tells me something about Faker, I don't surrender everything I thought about him or everything I think I've discovered all the way I've built up a premise about him. Likewise, I don't surrender my opinion to a small sample size of data. One match goes away that I hadn't expected in a way, I better just scrap the whole thing. It was all wrong. It was a lie. It was false. This is true. Whatever I've come to from this small sample size is true. Not the case at all. It has to build up and they have to make a solid case that beats out the old case and in key ways attacks its foundations and crumbles it and then builds something up of itself, which can be sustained and continue to be built and has merit beyond just itself as a thing. Likewise, I don't give up my rationality to faulty reasoning or logic where even though everyone's saying, yeah, we sort of agree with this and we think A equals B equals C, if it's like I try A equals B and then I try minus C, and like how does it minus C though, and then it ends up in D, like well, does it end up in D? If I can't get through it all, I'll try to consider that perspective and I'll try to understand if I'm missing something. But if I can't, then I won't say, well, I mean, I can't get through it, but people smarter than me have, therefore I'm just wrong and I'll just accept whatever they say. Certainly don't do that. I never will do that scenario. Likewise, just because I want something to be true, just because I want something to be the case, I want maybe an old thing I thought to be right, so I can go, that's it, I was always right about that. I try not to just surrender my current position to something that's tempting, that's nearby, that would allow me to be like that. If I can't find a way there logically, and if I can't find a way there reasonably, and I can't model correctly based on the information I have now, no matter how tempting it may be. And that's actually a problem, by the way, as an analyst or someone in the public. Especially when you on the side, you'll enjoy watching these things for fun. So when you're watching for fun, maybe you let off all the mental clamps and all these restraints and this particular like rule set and discipline, and maybe you just enjoy it like a fan and you do whatever. I'm sure many people do. When you then go back into analytical mode, though, you can't bring any of that with you. You can't bring who you want to win and the way you wish it was and the way you wish you would be right in this particular way in the future. If you do so, it will muddy and it will cloud your analysis as you do it. As a general exercise, I do regularly, part of the reason I read Reddit and part of the reason I read low Reddit, sometimes comments on Reddit that have low scores and comments that are by people I think are idiots, it's because I always want to know if they'll ever bring up something interesting. Now, some of them obviously I skip when they've really shown like 9 out of 10 times it's terrible. But in general, I want to see if there's an interesting opinion out there that isn't endorsed by public opinion. I want to consider other perspectives and not just look at them and go, well, I'll throw that away immediately. Actually read the whole thing and really consider. That's why sometimes when I get like irritated and I'll post about it, people are like, why don't you just ignore it? Because I'm trying to actually be reasonable here. Just because a person doesn't vote doesn't mean he's wrong. So sometimes I want to try it out and see from his perspective. Say, hey, maybe there's something to that actually. And that sometimes happens. Sometimes I'll see one and I'll go, you know what? When I see his whole argument, yeah, there is something to it. And I don't necessarily agree entirely. Or sometimes actually I change my mind. I'm like, I'm actually kind of decided when this guy makes a point here. Maybe he didn't express it the same way I would. But this is an interesting conclusion he got to here. And I connected point A to point C in this particular case. Now, also, as a general exercise, to foresee where I might be wrong and to see what would have to happen for my position to change, I'll try to argue against myself, to build the best case against what I think, to try and attack what I think in the certain areas and see where the weaknesses are and see what, because that's going to give me a hint, not to like cover that up and, oh, don't go to that area in a debate. No. What you want to do there is you want to work on that and you want to find out if that really is like the little thread that when you pull it unravels the whole thing. You want to be the one who unravels that, ideally, right? So go ahead and do it. Don't cover it up. Because the other way around is if you try to and actually find some more information that bolsters it up and makes that even better and even more tightly woven together or thicker or whatever, great, even better, right? And so basically what I'm saying is if it's wrong to like Alpha Draft, then I don't want to be right, if indeed someone can be right. But if you play at Alpha Draft, you can actually win even if you're wrong in terms of the numbers, because you can sometimes pick losing players and win the contest anyway over someone who picked winning players. I did it twice myself. In League of Legends, I had 2 head-to-heads with Monte Cristo where I picked more of the losing players than he did, and I won the contest because they got more points. Because it's about fantasy points. It's not about whether they won. It's about how many points they generate, kills, deaths, assists, how that all adds up. So my players were getting more in the games they won and some in the games they lost, where some of his in the games they won weren't getting enough. They were getting kills but without assists. They were getting some deaths but not enough kills to weigh it out. So the whole scenario actually meant that I won even though I was wrong. So great, right? There was even a guy who won my swag jar contest for EULCS with Gamers 2 and I think H2K players on the week where they both got upset and both lost. Mainly because everyone was wrong on that week. So he was the most right of the people that was wrong, because even though he was wrong, he picked the right players. So you see, you can't be wrong or right. It's not a static thing. And the swag jar concept shows why sometimes it's fine to be wrong as long as it's interesting, as long as it's entertaining. Which is, you don't just want to win. Sometimes it's interesting if you win with the wrong information, or you make a good point that doesn't necessarily add up overall, but it's for entertainment. That can have its own merit, and that's when it's the most swag, right? That's how it goes in Alpha Draft. Skrilla.